celebrating our 20th season. From the college by the lake, meeting the personalities and discussing the issues that affect all of Coeur d'Alene and the inland Northwest. We are the North Idaho College Public Forum. And now, here's your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today's program is very special for us. It is the conclusion of the 20th year of the North Idaho College Public Forum. So when we come to you next week, we'll be entering the 21st year. We started this year with the subject of art, and we have chosen to complete that circle by ending the year also with art. Today we're going to talk about visual art, and we have a visual artist with us, and we're very happy to have a friend of ours to deal with this very exciting and important topic. I welcome to the program Mary Frances Dondelinger, who lives in Seattle, Washington. She has a very distinguished background already in her early art career. First of all, I would report that she has a baccalaureate degree from Seattle University, and prior to that, some years ago, she attended North Idaho College, where she also studied art. So, Mary Frances, we feel some important connection with your work, with our people here at North Idaho College. She is very successful. She has had a number of juried shows, including one called the Lewis Clark Invitational Art Show in Lewiston, Idaho, in 1992. In fact, as we did this program in April. She also has had one called Art Splash, and it was in Redmond, Washington, again, in the year 1992. Another example was the Washington Trust Bank Corbin Art Center show in Spokane, Washington in 1991. I'm only giving some examples of the others that she has done. She also has had a number of exhibits. One was the American Institute of Architect Gallery, a solo show that was in Seattle, Washington, again in 1992, or it's scheduled for 1992. Also West Seattle Cultural Society Gallery, a solo show which took place in March 1992. She is currently working as a visual artist in Seattle, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the program, Mary Frances.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have regular panelist Steve Schenck, who is Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and I shall ask Steve to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Mary Frances, we've heard some of the highlights about your art career, but maybe you'd take us back a little bit and talk a little more about your development as an artist, how you got interested,
Sure.
And what sorts of things your formal studies involved.
Well, it's sort of ironic because my major interests developed right here in this campus, several doors down from this studio. I came to North Idaho College just to attend college and get some education. I ended up taking a class from Joe Jonas here several years ago, and from that it sparked my interest. I wasn't very good, in fact, frankly, I was quite horrible, but I was very interested and kept trying and kept painting. There were several other professors that really influenced me, Robert Harasoff, Ali Vogt. Those are just to name a few that really inspired me to work, and they had some belief in my ability, which was at that point fairly limited. So I spent a lot of time doing drawing on my own. My education isn't that vast as far as the formal education, but I spent a lot of time drawing on my own and doing drawing sessions at Pat Flamia's house with other artists who graciously allowed me to follow them around and ask them all kinds of really silly questions. So it started right here in this city. From there, I developed more of an interest in the commercial art aspect and saw that as a way of being creative as well as earning an income, which sometimes those two don't go together. So from there, I worked as a graphic artist for 3 years, and then finally moved to Seattle and focused on my fine arts. So that kind of gives you an overview of the variety of things.
Well, and you're not the typical, at least what I think is a typical story of someone who starts out from a very early age with some ability to draw and just develops that talent over time. I'm curious, did you ever ask Joe Jonas or Ali Vogt or one of your other instructors what they saw in your work, which you thought was very undistinguished, what they saw that told them there is some talent here?
Well, I think that their major emphasis was to encourage all of the students, not myself any more than any of the other students, to just be creative. So, and of course I took it very personal, that they were very interested in my work and that they liked my work. There's not one particular thing that stands out in my mind that they saw or pointed out. I think, to be very honest, I think I was a very average student. So I was not the star of the class in my mind. There was a show student work here, and I won first place, and they had an outside juror come in. And so I was very, very much encouraged by that. But I think my desire and my will to draw and be creative was a very strong influence. So any little point of appreciation of my work just made me feel like I could do anything.
Was there some point after you left North Idaho College, was it the Pat Flammia workshops or your studies in Seattle, some point where you said, hey, maybe I'm not just an ordinary artist, I'm starting to do better at this, and really got your confidence up?
Well, I think that most artists always struggle with the fact of, are they really an artist, and when am I good? And so I still go through those times of wondering, am I really an artist? Am I really good, or am I just kind of an average artist? The Pat Flammia drawing, they were actual drawing sessions, having a model and just very informal other artists from the community gathering. Mary D. Dodge, Alan Dodge, folks like that coming and drawing. They were very informal, but the fact that I was included in amongst that group, and I didn't know if it was because of my personality or my drawing skills, I was included into that group. That was really encouraging. That really encouraged me to believe that I could actually draw. So,
Mary Frances, we're going to talk about there's so many kinds of artwork, and not being certainly an expert in any stretch of the imagination myself, I have learned over the years on this program that there are so many different approaches. I'm going to have our staff to put up on the screen some of your work that you brought with you, which we find with our viewers that they really like to see what we're talking about, and that's certainly something that we owe them. And I'm going to have you describe your work, and then we'll talk a little more about your style after we finish.
Great.
Here is the first painting that's come up on the screen.
This is called Capitol Hill Cars. It is a scene of a street on Capitol Hill in Seattle where I paint often. This is done from just a quick sketch, charcoal sketch from that area, and then several days later doing the actual painting, more from the sketch and memory. It's done in oil pastels, and that piece has as many as 12 layers of pastel. It's fairly thick.
It's interesting how you can go from a sketch, but you're doing like photogenic mind work, and the fact that you're really, in addition to the sketch, remembering what that you were placing
right
on the canvas at a later time. Some artists, they have to go actually and do all their work right at the scene, do they not?
Right. I spend a lot of time really trying to interpret the scene, and I don't use photographs for reference for the most part, because I want to give my interpretation of the area. Now, it may be a little off from what the actual, if you compare it to a photograph or the actual area, but it gives a feeling, gives a sense of what that particular mood of that day was.
We're going to have them to put the second painting that you brought with you, and so you can describe to our viewers what this next painting is.
This is a red couch. It is also in oil pastels. This one also is very thick, and it has a lot of areas that are applied with a palette knife directly onto the piece, as well as using the palette knife to scrape many of the layers up and reapply them back down onto the paper. It is taking a couch and simplifying it to its essence.
And so when you're doing this type of work, you can have it right before you all the time, so you don't have to. Do you involve yourself in sketches at that point? This
also is a sketch of a couch that I did several days earlier. It was in someone else's house. That I really liked the shape of it, and then I just doing the quick sketches, then working on it several days later, it allows me more freedom to kind of embellish some of the areas that I liked, or to change the colors and not be so influenced by what is actually there.
One thing that's always intrigued me from the viewpoint of art, since I'm not in that field, I guess you're intrigued by things that you don't do yourself oftentimes, is what triggers one to look at a particular couch or scene or cars and say, that's what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that intrigues me too. A lot of times I can almost feel my hands drawing it before I even start to do it. There's almost a sense of knowing exactly, if I had some pencil or paper or charcoal or whatever I can find in front of me, that I could just feel myself drawing it. So, and I'm doing it as we speak here. But they're just, a lot of times it's just this sense of I know exactly what I would do with that if I was to draw it out. And many times that means if I don't have a pencil or something in my hand, that I get a piece of stick and burn the end of it and use it like a charcoal just to make a quick sketch so that I can save it for later.
It doesn't take much to trigger you that way, does it? Here's another view of the same couch, if you'd like to describe.
This is a red couch also, and for this particular series, I was taking couches and viewing them from different angles. The first red couch you saw was a front-on view, and this second one is a side view of that same red couch. Now, I did the sketch of the couch front-on, and then from memory did a side view and a top view. So from that, there's a lot of freedom to say, well, I think it would go like this, and frankly, it looks better if it kind of looks like this, or lines stretch a little farther.
And from this approach, it's more abstract, is it not?
It is much more abstract, and in fact, many people find it difficult to identify that there is a couch and a lamp there, unless they know beforehand.
Yes, there's certain challenges. I know one thing that I have found with some of my friends who are artists is too, that when you do something, and of course I know all artists are not the same in their attitudes, but that if you find certain meaning or purpose or appreciation, that must be very fulfilling. Or I have one friend that did a political painting, and I interpreted a certain way, and he got this huge smile and said, that is so rewarding, you got my message.
Yeah, I don't expect people to understand or get immediately what I do, because a lot of times, we're just in a different space. But when they do understand what I've been trying to do, it's very rewarding. Yeah.
It's a little bit like teaching when a student understands a certain concept. Here is the fourth and I believe the final painting that we're going to show today.
This one is called Alki Alleyway. It is a typical alleyway in West Seattle. I can almost guarantee you that the colors in reality are not as they, of the actual alleyway is not as I have represented in my painting here. But it gives kind of the feeling of what, at least how I see the alleyways in West Seattle. This piece has probably 16 layers of oil pastel on them, which gives a real translucent feel to many of the areas. And it's hard to see on a television screen when it's several generations removed from the actual piece. But
well, even with that, it's very, very fine work. Steve Sheen.
Mary Frances, did you, the technique that you described earlier with the layered acrylics, is that unique to you? Have you seen someone else who's using it? Where'd you come up with that concept?
I have not seen many other artists working in oil pastels that work in the many, many different layers. The technique that Steve is talking about is putting down a layer of oil pastels, or 3 or 4, until the pastel gets so thick you cannot add any more layers, and then spray with a fixative, and then add 3 or 4 more layers of pastel, and then add fixative, and you can keep building up for quite a while. It's not a technique that many people use. Oil pastels is fairly new to the arts arena as far as a respected medium. Most people use the oil paints. So there hasn't been a lot of experimentation throughout the years as early as perhaps the soft pastels. My technique is fairly simple. It allows for me to build layers that I couldn't ordinarily get. It also allows for me to use a palette knife to go back into the paints, dig down through the several layers, and take that paint and either reapply it or take it off. So I can scratch down and be able to get many surprises and mistakes, perhaps, on what colors are down on the lower levels. So.
You mentioned earlier that you periodically go through the self-doubt phase. Am I an accomplished artist? Am I not? How important is it to come on? There are a lot of people out there who can draw a chair, who could draw you, and it would look like you or look like a chair. Tony and I can't do that, but there are lots of people out there who can, who never become successful artists. How important is it to have a technique that is yours, that people like and appreciate?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure how important that is. If people find truth in your work, then I don't believe that any technique will hurt or help you. If your work is speaking very truthfully, then people will appreciate it and want to see it or purchase it or whatever. And the term successful is a very interesting term too, because successful needs to be quantified, whether it's monetarily or confidence or skill, or there are many different areas. So the whole thing of, I don't know that I will be working in this technique 2-4 years from now. It's something that I'm exploring and pushing further and further. We'll see how long I stay in it.
Has it pretty well monopolized your attention now? Is this
it is.
So you're not doing other?
No, the oil pastels is a major fascination for me, and in fact I will be spending the next month pushing the medium further and further. My first 6 months of using it, I pushed the oil pastel as far as I could at the time. For example, taking a light bulb, putting it on a light bulb, turning the light bulb on, letting the pastel melt and smoosh around, turning the light bulb off, applying more pastels, and seeing how many layers I could build up that way. It was an interesting experimentation, nothing that I could use, but it was just experimenting on how far the pastel could go.
Mary Frances, I have seen your work, and you're very modest, but you are very, very diverse and talented in so many areas, and some things you did in commercial work too, commercial art. But I'm very intrigued. Something you've done recently where you use what I would call visual aids, for example, a video and so forth. Would you tell us, you were invited along with some other people to honor certain women, and tell us what you did and how you did that.
Okay. Being very influenced by the postmodern era of technology, I, for the first time, was able to do an installation. It's about 6 feet tall installation that included video and television. The purpose was to design an apron for a famous mother, and then the aprons would be displayed during the month of May, Mother's Day. So I chose Rosa Parks as a woman that I've been truly inspired by, and designed a very long flowing apron that is actually held up by many different hands as symbolic of the civil rights movement needing to be held up by many different hands, both in the past and in the future. From her belly is a television, which the video Eyes on the Prize will be shown throughout the month-long installation. And then below Rosa Parks' apron is free aprons for anyone who comes to view the display to take with them if they accept the challenge of carrying on the civil rights movement. So it's kind of a diverse, three-dimensional display that challenged me more than I thought it would.
But it's exciting, excuse me, how you've used technology, or modern technology, in a certain art form.
It's modern technology. I think many of the artists today are concerned with technology and how they use it in their art, do should we reproduce our art? How does that affect the actual piece with all of the mass production, mass communication? What does it say about our art? So I really struggle with, do I make prints of my pieces? But I like the idea of using the technology in specific installations.
Well, that's very exciting. Steve Sheen.
Mary Frances, I'm more familiar with writers than I am with painters or other forms of artists. And I know that there's a wide difference in the style of work there, too. Some are very disciplined and get up and write from 8 o'clock in the morning till noon. Some write whenever they feel like it. How do you work? Do you have a time when you say, I'm going to be in my studio and I'm going to paint, or do you paint when you feel like it?
It depends on what's going on. I just finished my degree at Seattle University, and that took quite a bit of time, so I was able to paint whenever I could fit in time to do it. But last summer I was free to paint full-time, and currently I'm free to paint full-time. I get up at basically whenever I wake up, so that could be anywhere from 7:30 till 10, and I get up and I work, and we'll work for 3 or 4 hours and then take a break, and then work later into the evening. I work best in the evening time. So sometimes I can work until 2 or 3 in the morning, which means that I get up a little later the next morning. But
the process you described earlier, layers of oil pastels with fixatives, sounds to me like something that you can't just paint until the painting is done, that you have to paint, set it aside. Do you have 3 or 4 projects going at one time?
Yeah, as many or as 5 or 6 projects actually, and depending on the size of the piece. But it takes basically, I usually can't finish a piece in less than 2 weeks. So that allows for the drying time and adding the pastels and spraying more. So it is a lengthy project, but not any more than perhaps an oil painting that is, the artist is doing a lot of glazing or something. And I'm making analogies that don't really make sense, but I think about plastering and other works. Will that hold up over time? Is there a thickness that if you get beyond a certain point, it may crack as years go by? Or do you know? Is that something you're going to have to experiment with after some of your work has been around a while? It's certainly something that I need to take into account. I do know of other oil pastel artists who have worked thick with several layers of paint, working very thick. It should not crack. Oil pastels has just recently been tested for its light fastness. Those are new tests that are coming out. The cracking is something that I'll have to wait and see. The difference between an oil paint and an oil pastel is that oil pastel never dries, whereas an oil paint will actually dry because of what it's made of. But oil pastel is made of pigment, wax, and an oil. And it has a lot of oil in it, and it will never dry. So
I think Steve's question was just very fascinating, because as you do move into something, then maybe you're moving beyond what someone else has done to anticipate what might happen. You and I have talked before about your work, and whether one would call it representational or abstract and other things. And so would you tell our viewers that what you do and what influences you more than anything else in looking at different styles and approaches?
Sure. I'm really influenced by my environment, so I find it difficult to be put into a category as far as what I do. But my influence is the environment in which I live or spend my daily life. The Neighborhood series is an example of that. I just took down a show that had neighborhood scenes all over Seattle. Whether they are places that I visit friends or where I work or where I go to school, they represent the areas of which I spend my time. So my environment very much affects it. If it's a very exciting environment, a lot of times I find myself doing very simple pieces as far as just working with shapes and values. To kind of counteract the busyness of the environment. So it's hard to kind of put me peg me at this point. It would be easier, wouldn't it, if you could?
I admire this other approach, the freedom and the independence. I guess that ties to my whole philosophy.
Yes.
Also, Mary Frances, when you're in a smaller community like Coeur d'Alene versus Seattle, in that environmental change, I know you're here doing some painting, and so that takes on somewhat different dimension.
It certainly does. I'll be anxious to see what exactly comes out of that. I know that I worked in the corporate world for a while, and my paintings went from 7-foot paintings to 4-inch paintings after working for several years in a very rigid, confined area. So now being out here in the wonderful trees and freedom that I feel out here, I'll be interested to see what the effect will be.
Steve Sheen.
Well, Mary Frances, we talked about success, and I can't let that go entirely. Obviously, you're meeting some of the criteria for success. I mean, your work is accepted in juried art shows, like Art on the Green here in Coeur d'Alene, for instance. That I would think is one very real criteria of an artist's success. Another would be your happiness with it, and we talked about that a little bit. But another one that I can think of is being accepted in galleries where art is actually sold. Is your work being shown in any galleries in the Seattle area or in this area right now?
I just had a show at a gallery in Seattle, and in September I will have another show in a gallery. I have been approached by several galleries to represent me. In other words, they will be the sole handlers of my work. And at this point, I'm taking that very slow. I'm not sure that I'm ready for that. They're ready for it, but I'm not sure that I am. I have questions such as, what will the effect be on my art? Will I be then expected to paint the same type of stuff over time? The pressure of having someone represent my art. I'm not sure, and I know that when I'm ready, then it will be a much easier process. But I have been approached, and I am taking that very slowly.
We have just a little time left, but in relation to that, we had a great artist on this program some years ago. We've had him more than once, Harold Blaze, who I think is so gifted. He said it is so dangerous sometimes when you do commission work, he said, Tony, you don't have the same freedom. You have to please that person or persons.
Yes.
So you're referring to that question of freedom?
Yes, there's a big question coming from the commercial art world where you did everything to please the customer, to doing the fine arts where you're doing everything to push your own limits, your own skills, which may not please anybody, including the people you live with. So, yeah, there is a lot to do with freedom and really trying to stay true to yourself.
With that, to bring the program conclusion, on behalf of Steve Shink and our staff, thank you, Mary Frances. It's been just a delight interviewing you, and you've given our viewers so much to understand about the art world, and good luck to you in your work.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've enjoyed and appreciated this very fine program on art, and I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week when we'll start the 21st year of the North Idaho College Public Forum. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.